So we've established why we might want to grease the groove. We're now going to look at what greasing the groove is. For me, greasing the groove is obviously adding mobility, but we're trying to combine two planes of movement in order to add extra mobility to a joint or to a certain exercise or movement or overall area or line of fascia of the body. So in order to do that, let's have a little think about what movements might couple up well together, what planes of movement. Now we understand that we've got the sagittal plane, forwards and backwards. We've also got the frontal plane, side to side. We've got our transverse plane of movement, which is round and round, but also I'm going to add to this with a direction which is working up and down as well, and that's going to combine really nicely with one of the ones at the end. So there are these different planes of movement, these different movements available at the body that we need to work with in order to train well, but also in order to live life well as well. So there's that in mind, and also I want you to keep in mind the idea of translation versus rotation. Translation of the body or translation of a joint is it moving through space. So if I'm looking to translate at the anterior hip, it's the hip moving through space. Then we've got rotation, so it's on an axis. So if I wanted to get out there and then add extra rotation, I've gone through space and now I'm actually maintaining that space and I'm going through extra rotation. Those two things are really important, translation and rotation along with the three planes of motion. So let's simplify that and let's show you what we mean. Now we've got, if we're thinking about, and this is my hips, this Viper is my hips, and I'm thinking about trying to add a little bit more mobility. Maybe it's to a lunge, maybe it's to my running, it's something that I need to gather, and I've decided that my right hip is a little bit stickier than my left hip. So imagining that this is my right hip and I want to add more translation through this, what I can then start to do in order to look at this, with the translation, which plane of movement do we think would work best in order to grease the groove? Now what we think is that actually they're working through rotation through the frontal plane. If you see this here, we're going frontal plane with the rotation incorporated with translation in the sagittal plane. Now we're talking, and now we are, as you can see here, easily greasing the groove without banging into or banging the joint against itself. Now this does depend joint on joint whether that happens, but we're starting to think about which combination of movements works best with each other. Likewise, I could look at the frontal plane of movement. It might be that I want to be working on some lateral lunges today. If I'm working on lateral lunges and my translation's this way, now we can see with our ring here is actually, you know what, again, I reckon that moving rotation through the sagittal plane with the translation of the frontal plane would be a great combination for greasing the groove and allowing a little bit more freedom and mobility in the inner hip. And likewise, when we're now looking at the transverse plane, we're looking at the transverse plane of movement here, so we're now working round and round on an axis. It doesn't quite have the translation that the other two does. It's more of just, as we know, is rotation. So in order to go after this, what we're actually going to look at is that up and down works really well with round and round. So again, it's joint by joint, but we're starting to see here through this little diagram, this little model, is that we can combine two movements, add them together, and maybe get a bit more out of it. So let's really break that down into an example. So I'm going to go after my right hip. So if I'm after gaining mobility at my right hip in the anterior plane, and I want to gain a little bit more mobility because I don't feel like I'm getting enough, and I want to be able to go out on a run and hit it from number one. So from here, I'm going to get into this stance where I'm feeling that anterior stretch. I've not got a full stretch, but I've got a little bit of stretch on. What I'm going to combine that with is I'm going to get the hips moving from side to side through the frontal plane to add that nice bit of greasing of the groove. So now I've added those two planes, I'm greasing the groove at my anterior hip and it feels good. So once I've done that, I can then come back and I can retest, and you know what? I do feel a little bit more free at the hip, and I know if I go after that for 30 or 40 seconds, 8 to 10 big reps each way, that I'm going to make a significant improvement at that anterior hip. So that's just an example for the hip, but it's also available at the rest of the body as well. So an area of tension for everybody is the neck and shoulders. We all spend far too long on our phones or on our computers these days. If you're watching this right now, you're going to be increasing your neck tension. So let's unwind the neck as well. We're going to, and first I'm going to go for some extension at the neck. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my neck through extension. Then to add a little bit more stretch to that, to grease the groove of my neck, I'm then going to add some lateral flexion to it. So it looks like this. So it's very subtle but very powerful and impactful pair of movements at the neck in order to grease the groove. And if I can do it through extension, I can also do it through flexion too. So I've gone through flexion and now I'm going to go through lateral flexion at the neck again in order to grease that groove. So I'm working ear from side to side in order to grease the groove at the neck through the back side. And the same goes for the sides as well. If I want to release some tension through one side, I'd find a little bit of stretch through that side, and then again I can start to combine it with another movement. Now at the neck, it's built a little differently to the hip. I might find that the sagittal plane isn't quite working, but you know what, if I go through rotation and the transverse plane coupled with that lateral flexion, that's really what works. So it's up to you to find what works at what joints for the individual in front of you. Remember that everyone's different and they will need to do something differently in order to grease the groove well.